Hello everyone, my name is Stina Bengtsson. I am going to present to you some ongoing work on the relevance of news. And I will continue to talk about news relevance. And first I will give you a background. We have during the last decades or so seen a decreasing interest in news, particularly from young audiences. Young people across the world are changing their user practices when it comes to the media. Many have left traditional journalistic outlets and instead use much more social media, for example, which we all know are very differently organized and also contain different kinds of content. And this has sparked discussions and also some people are getting sort of worried about the decline of the public spheres, that we will not have any joint discussions anymore, etc., etc. So many people are being quite concerned about the fact that particularly young people are leaving traditional journalism and has went to other kinds of media outlets. And in this discussion, the relevance of news have come forward as a very important topic. Some people, as the Danish media researcher Kim Schroeder, for example, claim that media relevance, news relevance is the most important factor when understanding why some people let news down and other people stay with the news. If we look historically at media research, there has been for a long time an interest in the relevance of news, but from the beginning it was mostly directed towards media producers, editors, journalists, etc., and how they constructed relevance when they decided what kinds of events that would actually become news. Deciding what's news, for example, is a very famous book written by Herbert Gans in the 1970s, which has this perspective, and he shows how journalists, editors, etc., sort of negotiate news relevance as part of news values. From the 2000s and onwards, when we have faced these changes in media user practices, as already mentioned, many scholars have also started to show interest in news relevance as seen from an audience perspective. And many have also argued that the audience news, how the audience constructs news relevance differs from how journalists does it. And some have also tried to discuss this in new terms, such as in distinctions between what is newsworthy, which is what the journalists find important and relevant, and what is noteworthy, which is what the audience actually think is worthy of even looking at. So people have started within academia to discuss and also problematize these concepts. Just a very brief overview of earlier research of the more recent type, the ones that have actually explored audiences' relation to news relevance. You could summarize this basically in two questions and one definition. And the first question that earlier research has discussed is, how is news relevance constructed by the audience, that is? And they have sort of found a couple of different aspects that are important or vital when audiences construct news relevance, and that is assessments of the topics, the framing of the topics, but also the publishers, the brands and their credibility. This is also, of course, related to people's own identity and experiences and the culture and proximity of the topics. So these are aspects that audiences elaborate with and negotiate when they decide whether a piece of news is relevant or not. Another question is, where is news relevance practiced? And here, earlier research is also very sort of coherent. They point that news relevance is constructed and is important and created in the everyday routines of audiences, in their interpretations that they do in relation to these everyday routines, but also relates to the practices of public agency. I would like here to start with one definition of news relevance from earlier research. And this is from a linguistic study of news relevance, where they say that a news report is relevant if a news user treats it as impacting the everyday experiences and interactions of either that individual or a larger collectivity of which they describe themselves as a member. To quickly summarize then, according to earlier research, news relevance is constructed in a social context, and that context is everyday life, but it is also related to sort of larger collectivities that people find themselves or feel that they are part of. When we look at earlier research, we can also see that news relevance has been studied so far as one coherent thing. News relevance is something, and also that the relevance of news is studied as separate from the relevance of other kinds of media content. And with this as a vantage point, I have moved forward as part of a project that I'm working on together with a couple of colleagues in Sweden, but also in Estonia and Russia, where we study news perceptions and practices among young adults, people between 18 and 26 years old in these 3 countries. And the presentation that I am presenting right now is built on the 70 individuals that we have conducted in Sweden, so not in the other countries. And this is very much also work in progress, so we are continuously developing our analysis. Just a very quick note on theory. We build our theoretical approach towards news perceptions and practices on phenomenological theory. So in this sense, I have returned to Alfred Schutz and Luckmann, but also Berger and Luckmann in their The Social Construction of Reality from 1966. And we can just say that according to these theories, according to Schutz and his followers, structural relevance can be seen as 3 interrelated, socially constructed dimensions. And these dimensions that are, of course, interrelated as said, so they are like analytical categories, can be seen as being the theme, interpretation, but also motivation. So these are the dimensions that are at work when we define relevance in relation to everyday life and things that we meet there. I also build upon Campos' article from 2015, where he claims that relevance can be seen as a social matrix of attention, which means that relevance is what is behind where we put our attention, what we pay attention to. So it's related to our structures of relevance are at work when we pay attention to something. And lastly, a quote from Berger and Luckmann's Social Construction of Reality, when they say that my knowledge in everyday life is structured in terms of relevances. Some of these are determined by immediate pragmatic interests of mine, other by my general situation in society. So our relevances are dependent on who we are, but also where we are. When going through our empirical material, I have found 4 different types of news relevance in everyday life. Information to act upon, content that relates to one's personal history, content that maintains one's own sense of self, and content that develops one's understanding of the world and relates to one's position in it. And as you can see in the brackets, these types of relevance also have different temporalities. The first and the last are future-oriented, but the middle ones are not. And that is also quite important, I would say, because much news research is always sort of implying that news are always future-oriented. We need news in order to to know how to develop the world or our own position in it. I will give you a couple of examples that will make these different dimensions more comprehensible, hopefully. There we are. This is the first one, the future-oriented, information to act upon by myself or my close ones. And I'll start with a quote from a female 19-year-old care assistant who works in a nursery for young children or preschool. She says, yes, as I said, if it affects child nurseries around my city, or would affect public transport in my city, or if it affects my education, if they, let's say, would remove a course, I don't know exactly, but if it would affect my personal life or me personally, I would definitively click on it. And she discusses this in relation to pieces of information that flows in her feeds in social media. The second example is from a male, an 18-year-old student, a high school or gymnasium student, who says that what's important to me is what happens in the world, but particularly in Spain and Peru, because I have relatives there. So I want to be informed if there is a protest or something about Corona in Spain or Peru. I'm very interested because of that. I get my information from Facebook or Instagram, a little also from Twitter. So this is very future-oriented information that people feel that they need or their close ones need in order to know how to act in the future. The second aspect is content that relates to one's personal history. And that means that it is, its temporality is retrospective, it's backwards looking. And this is a quote from a female 21-year-old nurse assistant who says that sometimes I check Corona statistics from Indonesia too, because I've traveled there with my school to look at their healthcare system. And we traveled around and looked at it, how things were going on with their healthcare and different stuff. And then I got to know new people and we even became friends. So these earlier experiences of hers makes things that happen in Indonesia important for her, even though she doesn't have to have this kind of information for any more instrumental purposes. It's just sort of part of who she is. The third one is related to content that maintains one's sense of self. And in that sense, this kind of relevance has a more existential character. It has to do with who people feel that they are and who they also want to be or become. This quote is from a man, 23-year-old, who studies music production. And this is in a discussion about the Black Lives Matter movement and all the events that happened a year ago. This man, as was also many other of our respondents, he was sort of deeply moved by what happened in the US at this time. And he says, it's been everywhere, more or less. I mean, the entire Instagram was filled with, just black pictures. So the entire flow was just black, kind of. And then I also posted about it because it's so important to pay attention to it, actually, to do something about it, to the extent that you can. It's on Facebook, it's called Event, that you can be part of. And then you can see those who promoted black culture, so to speak, and black art. So they show you black musicians and artists, kind of. And it's been so nice to follow, I think. And I think it's so important to follow and support and help, sort of, as much as you can. So this really related to him, and he also talked a lot about how he had sort of realized who he was in the world and what kind of his own position in the world and what he could do with that position in order to help. The last one is related to content that relates to one's own social position, to one's social position in the world, which is a social but also collective kind of relevance. And this is also sort of future oriented. And it can be related to smaller social groups, such as friends, relatives, etc., but also to larger ones, sort of the public in one's country, or even more broadly also. This unemployed man, 21 years old, says, If something is relevant for someone, I will share it with them. If it's some kind of football news, as when Diego Maradona died the other day, then I sent it to my friends who are interested in football. I didn't send it to his friend who was part of the same discussion group, because I know he's not interested in football. So to conclude then, what is news relevance for young Swedish audiences? As you can see, I have put news in brackets, because whether something is news or not doesn't really seem so important for our respondents. Information or facts can be super important, even though they do not come from a journalistic organization. So to start with, news relevance is much wider than just news. They don't really make that important distinction, even though it can be done in some particular situations when the information that you need is very urgent and it's really important that it is true and everything, then people can go to a particular newspaper or to public service television or something like that. Another conclusion is also that news relevance is much more than just getting and assessing information. As you can see, people discuss relevance and news relevance as something much broader than just getting information that you need in order to act. That is just one part of it. So there are several dimensions of news relevance. And also that news relevance has different temporalities. Which means that it's not only future oriented, it's not only information that you need in order to sort of move forward in your life. It's also a way of keeping a contact with your earlier experiences, your history, but also, of course, other people that are in other places in the world, for example. Going back to Herbert Gans and his deciding what's news, deciding what is actually news is not an important question for our respondents. As already said, they are much more sort of open in relation to different kinds of content. And it's not even clear, I would say, if deciding what's news has ever been such an important question for audiences. But I don't have an answer to that question. But to conclude, in order to understand the transformation of public interest and public connection, I believe we need to look more widely, but also deeply at people's relations to the mediated world beyond how they pay attention to information and also to proper news. But this we can discuss more in the seminar. Thank you very much. Obrigada. I'm looking forward to your comments.